I left off my last video talking about how my son was in mandatory foster care in the specific state that his adoption was facilitated within. That was Virginia, and there was a mandatory 10 days of foster care. I had demanded to meet the mother who would be watching over him during those 10 days. So within those 10 days, I had been told in advance that I would be allowed 3, I think maybe hour-long visits, maybe an hour-and-a-half long visits. So I arrived at my first visit. Honestly, all 3 of these visits blurred together. As I said before, I just couldn't believe that things kept coming to an end, but every next milestone of hope was something that I clung to with my entire being. The hope that I would get to see him again, and who knows what might happen. You know, maybe one of these adults watching will finally see how obviously wrong it is to be separating me from my son. Maybe someone will see how much I love him. Maybe my mother will be like, oh no, it's coming to an end, and herself will be like, I don't want this anymore. I had all this underlying subconscious, hard to put out of my body with language, hope that this wasn't going to occur. So I arrived at each of the foster care visits just like a bat out of hell, get me out of this car and racing over to where I knew my son was. And I have pictures that are posted on my Instagram, and I will also probably be making a video on my TikTok to kind of show some of those pictures. I don't have videos. We didn't really have video camera with us and had older phones at the time. Pictures of me just holding him. I'm gonna put his face next to my face and just breathe. So much peace to be found being with him, and only chaos and agony being separated. So after those foster care visits did come to an end, then the next thing that, in a very complicated way, I both looked forward to and dreaded with my entire heart was placement day. I looked forward to it because I knew that my now husband, Nathan, was going to be coming. I hadn't seen him hardly at all throughout my pregnancy, and every time I had been these very controlled, monitored, very uncomfortable situations, and I knew his parents were going to be there. In watching this video back, I realized there was some information I wanted to insert right here, and that's a couple of things. One, there were a few times that I worked really, really hard to advocate for what I wanted, how I was feeling. I mean, I did it a lot of times throughout my pregnancy while I was at the home, a lot of times, but there were a handful of really strong, adamant begging moments. I mentioned one before. It was a phone call with my parents, one that I was allowed to have, where I had a speech prepared. And then my dad got off the phone. My mom came up the next day and picked out the adoptive parent she wanted my son to go to. The next attempt was in the hospital, begging everyone in that room to see how desperate I was not to sign those relinquishment papers. And the next time that occurred was somewhere within the mandatory foster care visitations that I was allowed the foster care visitation within the mandatory foster care stint of 10 days. And during this time, I begged my mother who was saying, you can't come home. Your dad won't let you come home. I won't let you come home. That's not an option to you. I begged her to set up a meeting with the adoption facilitator, so not my caseworker. I don't recall my caseworker being at this meeting. I think she could have been. Part of me feels like I kind of remember her being there, but I'm not certain. Anyways, I know that the adoption facilitator was there, the one that would be doing the paperwork, the one that was having negotiations and conversations with the adoptive couple. She was who needed to be at this meeting. So I begged for this meeting, and I had no idea what I was going to do at this meeting, right? Because I'm so unsupported. I'm having to beg for it in the first place, and I'm just desperate. I'm desperate for someone to hear me. This is coming down to the final days before the placement ceremony. I know everything is just spiraling, but I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's happening with my legal rights. I don't know, someone may have given me some of that information, but it was always given, anything that was given to me was given in ways that were not like empowering, rather just like kind of minimally given in ways that I did not understand, especially regarding my rights, my legal, authoritative, empowering rights. I did not understand I had any power at all, if that is not been made clear already. So I asked for this meeting, and I just go into this meeting sitting at this coffee shop. And I just start kind of begging the caseworker and my mother, like, help me. Please give me information. Give me anything. Help me. I don't know what's going on. I'm terrified. I'm scared. I don't want this. I don't want to lose my son. I'm terrified. It's really hard for me to sum up what I was asking of them, because I guess the bottom line is that I didn't understand how to ask any more clearly than I'd been asking all along, and yet continuously being met without being allowed what I was asking for. And it was such a confusing thing that these professionals, if you'll understand that, were agreeing with my parents telling me I didn't have a choice right in front of their own faces, telling me they wouldn't let me come home and all these things. They saw how disempowered my parents were making me, literally, because they'd locked me away. I didn't have time to save money, get a job, have contact, and they were watching this happen and enabling it, right? So it got so confusing, and this panicked final end of everything, like, I don't even know how to ask any harder than I'm asking. Give me information. And bottom line, the thing I most remember the adoption facilitator saying to me was, can you live with yourself? Could you really live with yourself? Think about it. Can you actually do this to this couple that they haven't done anything to deserve this? They haven't done anything to deserve you taking back what you have given, and they are deserving of a child. Could you really live with yourself taking this child back away? Which, by the way, hadn't even occurred yet, but this social worker, this caseworker put that on me, a 17-year-old. And not only was she putting it on me, but my parent was sitting right there also in alignment with this questioning. And all I could figure out how to say was, how am I supposed to survive? How am I supposed to survive? And as it was coming out of my mouth, I was so angry, because at the same time, it sounded selfish. It matched with the narrative that had been shoved down my throat the whole time, that any desires that I had innately, because they were personal desires, are self-centered. It was put on me, a teenager in crisis, that I needed to be thinking about couples who face infertility. And if I'm thinking about my own personal desires, it's purely selfish, and I need to be doing something selfless. And so the response that I got was, you just need to trust that your heart will find healing because of this gift that you're giving. Like, that's the redemption plan in store for you. And I was just met with a dead end. I was just met with blank stares and a dead end, and a lack of communicating any type of normal, healthy communication from a professional and my mother sitting there in that crisis moment of panic and begging. That night, I then went back to that house I was staying in, my mom's friends, and I continued to beg. I found my sister when my mom wasn't listening or looking, and I just asked her, like, could I come live with you? Could I stay with you? She was staying off campus in an apartment. She didn't have any money. She didn't have any way to help me, really. She was in college. And I just was begging her, could you think of a way? Can you think of how we could convince mom and dad? Can you help me? And I just remember she was just so scared and overwhelmed, and I'm not mad at her, but what she did was she went and told my mom, not like she was trying to tell on me, but she just went and tried to talk to my mom about what was happening and ask my mom. She tried to advocate for me, really. She did. She tried to advocate for me to my mom, and bottom line, she also failed. And my mom convinced her that it wasn't her burden to take on, and she shouldn't do that. And no, the answer's no. And that was just, I can't express to you all, like anyone listening, how defeated I was. Another thing that's really important to explain is my husband's family and their role in all of this. The lack of access they had to me, and the minimal amounts of being able to have a say that they had. So something really important to take note of is that at the beginning of my pregnancy, at the beginning of my parents finding out, they, without knowing my husband, because they'd been so opposed to having a daughter who would date, and like, who knows what, just the fear of something like this occurring, having 3 daughters, they just, had villainized my boyfriend without really getting to know him from the start. And immediately they were just calling him that man that got you pregnant. He was 18, like I was 16. We were not even quite 2 whole years apart. Or, yeah. And I was just so like, why are you guys trying to make it seem like this older person took advantage of me? We are really close friends, like, and then we fell in love and started dating. Like, this is just nuts. And they decided to start advocating behind my back initially that I had been taken advantage of, and a word I'm not sure I can use on the internet was used a lot. And accusations, they threatened to charge him legally with having taken advantage of me. And when I found out that this was happening, I don't know how long it had been going on. I don't know how long that threat had been placed on Nathan, how long he'd been living in that fear, and how that had established the inability to know what to do, and how his parents were fearful of that. Because that's a very real legal thing that my parents, without my permission, because I was underage, could have seen through. And they continued to threaten that all throughout my pregnancy behind my back, despite me advocating that I did not want that to be done. I had said to them, there is absolutely no validity to that. That is completely and entirely untrue. I won't stand for it, and I will not back it up. I will not testify to that. That is false. But to my husband's memory, and of course I believe him, it happened countless times apparently while I wasn't there, that continued to be used against him while I was being locked away and he was unable to talk to me. So additionally, he didn't even have the feedback or knowing what I was saying, how I was feeling. I can't imagine, I do know now how that was making him feel. I don't know really much about how it was making his parents feel and how scared they were to involve themselves too much, but I did find out at some point in my pregnancy that they wanted me to come live with them. And I remember I was frustrated about it. I was upset about it because I was just like, okay, well, why is no one contacting me? Why is no one getting through to me? Why are they not like finding a way to get to me? I'm the one that's locked away. I'm the one that's been told like I don't get to have access to talk with anyone. So why aren't these other adults finding their way to me? Why is it that I couldn't have put this to words then. I know it now. I know how to say now. I guess I had to advocate to access them, but I didn't know how to do that. I did not know them yet, but I imagine that they were very, very scared because in truth, legally, they, being the paternal biology, have significantly less of a voice. And technically their son was over the age of 18. So I know looking back on, they came up once for a mediated mediated meeting with my social worker present, and I think some other staff members as well, and my parents. And I guess that was either a second or a third. I think it might have been only the second time that Nathan had been able to come up. So he was there for one very short, awkward interaction, facilitated and mediated. He was there for the interview, and he was there for this. And I just remember that day was just so incredibly uncomfortable, and I was so upset about how it was going. It felt stupid. It felt stupid, like it was staged. Like, well, my parents have all the say here. They've got all of their representation. They've got this home. They've got me on lockdown. I don't even get to come into the room until the staff gives me permission. My parents aren't even the ones coming to get me from my own place in the house and bringing me. Like, they're waiting for the staff to give me permission to come in, and like they're meeting at every single second of everything, making sure that everyone's only talking to so-and-so when they're allowed to, and just no looks are even allowed to be exchanged until they're under observation. It was just so stressful. And I was just feeling like my now in-laws, my now husband's parents, like they have to know what they're doing to be able to tear this whole system down. They have to be educated. They have to be able to advocate for me. They have to be fierce to break all this down and be able to advocate that family preservation and keeping me with my child, regardless if I marry their son or not, whatever, is what's best here. They would have to hold my parents accountable, the facilities accountable, everything. And I don't blame them for not knowing how to do that. I know they tried to speak their mind. I know my mother-in-law was crying, but I just remember feeling so frustrated because they weren't succeeding. They weren't communicating in any kind of way that made me have any kind of empowerment or understanding about how to gain freedom from the situation I was in. And then I'll never forget when they were leaving that day, my mother-in-law was just sitting on the floor by the door that I had to walk out of, and she was just sitting there crying. And I haven't talked to her about this, or maybe I have a long time ago, but I just remember feeling like, why are you sitting there crying? That's not what I need from you. That's not what I need from you. And I probably had a look of irritation and anger on my face, because that's not what I needed. I didn't know what I needed, but I really needed someone that cared to see me not lose my child to know what I needed. I needed someone to advocate for me, and there was really no one else that was ever going to do it. So I remember I was irritated and angry that day because it wasn't working. The one thing that could have helped me, it wasn't working. It's so stupid, of course, in many ways, that I had any hope that anything other than a ceremony where he was permanently separated from me was going to occur. But I had been so kept away from anyone that wanted to help me keep him in parent that the knowing I was going to be seeing people that had said they didn't want to see family separation occur always sparked this, like, there wasn't a fire of knowing within me. There was a little spark, right? Just like maybe something will catch, maybe something will change. I did not know how to affect that change for all of the reasons I've listed in previous videos. So placement day comes around and we're in the back room. This is myself, Nathan, and Jake. We're given a few minutes before we're supposed to walk out the door into a room full of everyone waiting for a placement ceremony to occur. So we're in this back room. We're supposed to be going out to a room full of people waiting, including the hopeful adoptive parents who I didn't know at all. I did not know them at all. So myself, Nathan, and Jake are standing there together having our last moments together, which also felt like our first moments together, because it was the only time we'd ever been all alone together. We'd never been given that time to bond, to connect, to have needed conversations, to actually experience what was happening to us without control, watchful eyes, boundaries, and rules being placed on what we were allowed to be doing. My husband and I relived this memory a million times in our life. We both were standing there, just mind, body, and soul, very viscerally aware of this door to our left that had this big neon exit sign over it. And to the right was the door we were supposed to be exiting through momentarily to go into the placement ceremony. And I'm not in a place today where I can really convey the emotions of what was going on in my body, so I'm just gonna speak it out. My whole body felt like a dream where you're trying to run and you can't. I was just thinking over and over and over again, I could run out that door, right? I could just run out that door. And then the immediate feedback that would flood my body as well was, if you run out that door, you will get arrested. They will take him away from you. You will never see him again. This is already done. You've already lost. I don't know what's going on with my rights. They may have already been fully terminated. They told me that this was a privilege, that they're letting me hold him for a minute before walking out, which in all these different ways made me think, okay, so again, no one has ever agreed that he's my son. They're treating me like I don't even really deserve this moment with him. You know, if these authority figures think that, the police will think that too. Have they already signed paperwork, the adoptive parents? Are they already legally in charge of this situation? You know, I had no idea. That's what's flooding through my brain. The biggest fear was of never being able to see him again, not being able to make sure that, well, if I perform perfectly, hopefully they won't cut me out of his life. Hopefully they'll let me at least be someone that he always knows loves him. And I'll do whatever it takes for forever to always make sure that I'm in his life and he knows that I love him. But if I run out that door, I probably will lose that opportunity, and I don't believe in a reality where anyone or anything will permit me to keep him. And I know that my husband was feeling the same ways as he shared with me over the years. So that's a really tragic and brutal memory that, you know, I've just spun around in my brain a million times, questioning why I didn't run out that door. But, you know, I've done some investigative work, and I have come to find that I'm fairly certain I in fact probably would have been chased by the police, and likely I could have been prosecuted, and I likely never would have seen my son again. I really do think that's what would have happened. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I ever will know. So going into the placement day, I guess I'll just share some strange details. I can't speak for anyone but myself. That's what I will try very hard not to do that. But I walk out the room and everything's like in slow motion. I just feel like my whole body's falling out of me onto the floor. You know, like I feel like a piece of lead walking my son down this little aisle towards the adoptive parents waiting for me. Just honestly, for me, a moment I did not want to be present for. I did not want this ceremonial thing happening. I didn't curate this. This is something else that was curated, and I was being told I have to be a part of. So I place my son in the arms of the hopeful adoptive mother, and I don't know what her emotions were. She's probably nervous. And I guess I'll leave it at that. She was hard to read. And I know for a fact she couldn't read me or know what I was feeling, because no one had ever tried to know me or find out what I was feeling on their end. My husband's family was very solemn and quiet and just grieving in a way that I think was quite palpable and obvious in the room. He has a large family, so there's a lot of them there, and they had a very discernible energy. Quite certain, actually, looking back, that probably the adoptive parents could perceive that as they sat there in that room awkwardly waiting for us to walk through the door with my son. My family, on the other hand, specifically my mother and father, were acting very happy and pleased. So then the placement ceremony comes to an end. That event comes to an end. I will say the adoptive parents gave my husband a watch, and they gave me a necklace, a diamond necklace, which was a miniature version of the one the adoptive mother wore around her neck. So she wore like one that was like about this big, and the one she gave me was about this big, right? I'm just gonna leave that for what that is, without really relaying a lot of my feelings and thoughts about that. So we leave placement day, and I'm just destroyed. I have begun to go numb at this point, because I physically am just so defeated. I'm just so empty. I think one part of me, though, did think, okay, now maybe my parents will love me again. I don't even know what I was thinking at that point, because I just didn't feel anything. I couldn't talk to my sisters. I wasn't allowed to talk to Nathan. He left that day. I didn't even get to talk to him. You know, I kept thinking somehow eventually conversations will begin. Somehow eventually someone will see that this is all crazy and that I'm in so much agony, and like how do all of these adults just keep permitting and allowing this to occur? This is when, I'm not sure if it was on this day or in the day right after. It had to have probably been around the same time, because I think we actually ended up going back to North Carolina that day right after the ceremony. So it probably was around this day that my social worker, the woman who'd been my mom's college friend, she said to me, out of all the girls I've ever counseled, you and Nathan are just the best. You would have made wonderful parents. And then she proceeded to pay Nathan some more compliments about himself, and just she didn't apologize. She didn't say this didn't need to happen. She just made the very weird comment that you would have made amazing parents. I have so many feelings about that. It made me so upset. Like, why are you saying this to me now? She wanted to act like she didn't have a say in the whole situation. Like, it was my parents and she was just a gatekeeper and her job was just to obey my parents. Like, she was just a facilitator and a middleman. No. You have your degree in social work. You're getting your master's degree. Like, this is your job. You're being paid to do this. Your job is to represent the person, the mother, the one whose entire life is altered forever by what's happening. I'm in an isolation tank in a maternity home that you full well understand is isolating and preventing me from having any access to the outside world outside of you. So yeah, my parents have set the rules, sent me to a place like this and told you what they do and do not want you to say, but ultimately, legally, your job is to offer me the information, and specifically the information that I ask for. And I asked for encouragement. I asked for information. I asked to be told what it could look like if I kept my son, how I could go about doing that. And you withheld that type of information from me under the guise that you weren't going to say or do anything that my parents did not want. And I strongly believe 100% that is because the home needed financial they were in need of financing, and my son's adoption was going to provide income to the home. And I believe that you simply sat on your hands in many ways to enable the adoption occurring without allowing yourself to think about the agony I would be living with for the rest of my life. And I think when you're alone with yourself, you know what you did to me. I also don't think you let yourself take the blame. I have never reached out to that woman again. She has tried to reach out to me, and I can't speak with her. So we leave the placement ceremony that day. My parents take me home, and my mom had actually planned a trip. She'd read somewhere that that's a good thing to do for your family after you force your child to give up their child for adoption, is have a family trip to reunify, right? I shared in my other video about, actually I didn't, so I'll share this now. My mother had pushed for my labor to be pushed up, my delivery, to be pushed up. I was induced actually, because if I didn't have my son when she needed me to, on his due date or sooner, and then the placement ceremony wasn't set to occur because of the mandatory 10 days of foster care, we were going to lose out on her deposit on the pre-decided vacation time that she had already planned. So she actually, of course, a lot of these things people will say, well, we asked you what you wanted. Oh, please. Like, yeah, she asked me if I was okay with being induced. I didn't know how much more painful inducement medication could be than a natural childbirth. I did not know anything about childbirths. And yeah, I wanted my pregnancy to be over. I was miserable. I could barely breathe. I was dying to meet my son. I was dying to not be in prison anymore. There's a million reasons why I said, okay, sure. But that is still an incredibly, something that I'm not okay with, the fact that my mom pushed for that or even encouraged it, because it was financially motivated, as most of her decisions often are. It was motivated to not lose that money, and a lot of pressure was placed on me to make a decision to give birth via being induced to not lose out on a vacation plan that she had in place. So that happened. So we leave and we go on this vacation, right? And actually my good friends that I'd lived with in the home, her and her mom came down and saw us, and I got to be with her son, which was something I was very grateful for. And on this vacation, I'll never forget, and I'm not going to talk about this for very long, it's just something that happened. I'm sobbing in my room holding my son's picture, as I often was when I was trying to find privacy for myself. I really did not want to be grieving in front of my family because I felt so unseen and misunderstood by my family. I didn't feel safe with them. So I was in my room and I was crying. And I overheard my father saying to my mother, I don't want to have to listen to her crying. And he ended up leaving the trip and going home. He just didn't want to be around it. That coincides with how he often behaved throughout my pregnancy, and that just began the journey of me realizing, oh, so giving up my own child to re-earn my father's love, trying to do exactly what he said, trying to be the perfect daughter and obey him, and, you know, living in all this shame that I've disappointed him, that I've shamed him, the shame I've carried for him, when I didn't feel ashamed of my own child, of my own pregnancy, outside of this shame being placed on me, you know, well, I have to keep carrying it because he's now ashamed. He's still ashamed of me, even after everything. And so I went to college. Then that fall, I didn't reach out to the father of my child, Nathan, at all. Even though I wanted to, desperate with every fiber of my being every single day. I just desperately wanted to be talking to him. I'd been wanting to talk to him since I was sent away. I'd been wanting to, I don't know what, argue, fight for understanding, fight our way through, understand one another, reconnect. And so I was desperately longing to talk to him. And I just knew I couldn't bring that up. I knew I couldn't say anything about that to my parents. But as I'm in college, like, the feeling just kept growing and growing and growing, and I just couldn't escape it, you know, and there's so much to that. There's so much to that. So one day I call my dad up. I'm terrified. I'm shaking all over. And I'd planned out the speech in my head, and I'd said to him, would you be okay if I had a mediated phone call with Nathan? I just really need to talk to him. And my dad got very upset with me and just said some more horrible things to me and told me no. And somewhere along this timeline, I might have these two things backwards. At home, I was at home for Christmas break at one point, and I confronted my dad about how I was feeling, about how he was still treating me like he was ashamed of me, and I bled out some things about how I really felt about how everything had happened, and he got very, very angry with me and said some more awful things, and I told him, like, I realized we just can't talk. As I think that happened after I'd asked him for permission to speak with Nathan. I said, we just don't have a relationship. This isn't a relationship in any way. And he got very angry. I'm not going to relay all the details of that. But I continued to try to please my father. Maybe that was before, maybe it was after that confrontation. And I had waited another month. I said, okay, well, I'm going to think more about this for a month. I'm going to pray about it more for a month. And then after a month, I'm going to ask you again. And so I asked him again, and I said, you know, I've come up with this idea. What if there's a mediator? What if I am on the phone and have a mediated conversation with him? So strangely, my father kind of agreed to that a little bit. I think that it was just something that was just so reasonable, and he was beginning to lose control. There's really not a whole lot left that he had over me. There wasn't a connection between us anymore. And so he signed off on that, kind of. And so I called Nathan at one point with, like, a mediator that I'd used from the home, like one of the staff members who agreed to do it for me. And because at that point they had been making me come up to do my homework in front of them. That's another thing. So someone had agreed to mediate the conversation, and my husband was just so, why are you calling me? You know, what's happening? And why is there a mediator on the phone call? And it was just so incredibly uncomfortable. So that didn't last for very long. But that definitely sparked in him that, like, this isn't over. This isn't done. She's trying to find her way out of the suppression and oppression of her parents' control. So I let my dad know how I felt about that conversation. That didn't go over well. I think that's when I went home and ended up having that confrontation with him. And then after that, things got worse, and it might have been that same night, I had a pretty large confrontation with my father, telling him how I feel, and things got really unsafe for me, in a nutshell, and I had to leave my home that night. And that's when I called Nathan for the first time, unfiltered, unmediated. That was the first time I spoke to him, just me and him again. That was about 6 months after my son was lost to us. And he raced across town. I'll never forget. His dad heard that it was me calling and said, go get her. That kind of stuff's hard to remember. Stuff's hard to remember. And so he raced across town and came and got me. And a lot of that is just history, just reconnecting, him trying to understand what happened. It led to me spending the next many years of my life only blaming myself for what happened. We ended up getting married. It's all been incredibly hard since then. I've set a lot of boundaries with my parents over the years, specifically regarding my 2 younger children when they were born. And then over the years, I've definitely worked pretty hard to cultivate family preservation and family connection with a lot of boundaries, because I did not want to perpetuate family brokenness and family separation. And that has been incredibly hard, to toe the line between feeling that my children are not safe, not feeling safe myself, my body being very harmed by navigating my parents when I don't feel a safety. You know, regardless of my mother's attempts to fully acknowledge in every articulate way that I tell her what she did, I remind her of everything constantly, because that's the only way I've been able to maintain having a relationship with her, and she accepts it fully and just will let me say anything I need to her anytime. But the bottom line with both of my parents is that they both are still very religious and lean heavily into the same principles and thinking that perpetuated the exact same decisions and ways of operating that led to the exact outcome that it led to all throughout my childhood, and then to my child being permanently taken away from me. And so even though with my mom, there's been a lot of attempts for her to show up for me, unfortunately, she's never used the same tenacity she used to separate me from my child to investigate the industry of adoption and what it's rooted in. And it's rooted directly in the religion that she so deeply is committed to. And there's so much to that I'm not going to just completely continue to unravel. But yeah, I guess I'm just trying to explain a little bit that nothing about this is simple and easy. And I know people constantly want to ask what's going on with my parents. And I'm also, of course, trying to speak to my son if he wants to watch this video and hear things are complicated and hard with them. And bottom line, I'm the mediator. I am the safety. I will always provide safety. I will always provide access if it's wanted. And I will bend over backwards for everyone around me and try to put myself at the bottom of the totem pole. And at this point in my life, however, I'm having to put myself closer to the top of the totem pole in order to protect my ability to survive and cope, because my son is my #1 priority, and being able to survive for him, be here, and be able to stay alive for him is what I have to do. And right now I have to have boundaries for my ability to sleep, eat, function. And lately, making these videos have been incredibly therapeutic to me, and I can't do this when I'm trying to navigate other people's feelings. I have to do what my gut tells me is right. And anyways, that's it for now.